All right, everybody I see is starting to pile in. We're expecting over 100 participants tonight, which is wonderful. Thank you all for taking the time to come and join us tonight. This webinar is basically here for information purposes. We used to do this every other year, obviously a little bit difficult with some of what happened last year, but we're happy to be able to do this again. So without further ado, welcome everybody to the grade 11 and 12 course planning and post-secondary planning webinar. The purpose of this presentation is basically to help students and parents frame their planning and thinking going forward with course selection around the corner. We'll be starting course selection for grade 12s on Monday, and grade 11s will follow right after. Hopefully this will also help you demystify some of the things you may hear about post-secondary planning, university applications, and maybe even some of the questions you may have about course selection in itself for those of us new to the school system. And finally, this information session and some guidance on planning may help you alleviate some of the anxiety and concerns you might have regarding course selection and applying to university. I will be trying to touch on as much as possible. This presentation is put together based on the broader grade 11 and 12 curriculum document, which is available online on the Toronto Prep School website, and has also been sent in preparation of this webinar to your EDSB inbox. And so you can view that document. It's about 60 pages. We're not going to go through all those pages tonight, but a lot of the information is on there that you may need. Before I start, I just want to go through some brief admin stuff. And so a recording of this will be shared after the webinar. So if you are disrupted and you have to step out at any point, or even if you're watching this after the fact and missed it, you'll be able to access this. Or if you want to come back and review it and see what was said or shared, especially when we get to the Q&A section, you can do that as well. I do ask that you save your questions for the end of the webinar. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have the chat blocked off right now. At the end of the webinar, I'm going to start asking some questions that were submitted to me beforehand. And those of you who have questions throughout this presentation, write them down or save them in your mind, and then you can type them into the chat afterwards. And I'll scroll through and get to as many as I can. We have about an hour here, and I may go a little bit over, we'll see. But I'll try to get to as much as I can. If I cannot get to your question individually in this webinar session, know that you can save it and bring all of your questions to your individual course selection meetings. So I'll be meeting with each grade 11 and 12 student one-on-one, individually, or parents. Parents are welcome as well, to discuss and to actually put together a plan for course selection going forward. So all of you will have that support individually. And finally, the last resource that I would direct you to is the TPS website. Plenty of information there in terms of academics, course profiles. For courses that we have already, there's some new courses coming in next year. We may not have the profiles for those up just yet, but you can keep an eye on the website because those will be coming as well. All right. So this presentation is going to go through about 7 sections or so. I'm going to start with looking at ossd requirements. That's your Ontario Secondary School Diploma. We're going to talk about what it means to be entering grade 11 and 12. We're going to talk about making choices in grade 11 and 12 for both graduation and post-secondary planning. We're going to talk about post-secondary admissions, what that includes and entails, and then the application process as well, which is supported by the guidance office at TPS. We'll talk about next steps for all of us with the coming weeks of course selection. And then finally, we'll have a little recap in our Q&A session at the end. So with time of the essence, let's get started. Alrighty, so let's start with the Ontario Secondary School Diploma. Essentially, I'm going to be really quick with this section because I think everybody wants to get to the course selection and post-secondary planning section. But I do want you guys to be aware that graduation and applications are 2 separate processes. And so when we're starting to frame our mentality and our planning going forward, we're looking at graduation as one step and then applications to post-secondary programs as another, especially for applying to university. Essentially, the basics are we need 30 credits to graduate from high school. We can get those 30 credits to graduate without actually having what we need to apply to universities. So know that those 2 things need to be planned for separately. In addition to the 30 credits, you need 40 hours of community service involvement and a grade 10 literacy requirement. And so that literacy requirement usually comes in the form of a literacy test, but occasionally that might be a literacy course for students who are unsuccessful with the test 2 times. Now, with COVID-19 impacting the school and education system so severely over the past year, obviously many of you are in a position where you didn't get to write your literacy test in grade 10, or those of you who are in grade 10 this year didn't get to write it this year. Unfortunately, I can't give a lot of clarity on that, but I'll tell you where we are so far. Essentially, the literacy test was canceled for this year. There is an online pilot version of the test that has been made available only to select public school systems. The TDSB, for example, has waived their right to undergo that pilot project, and so they're not writing that test. And so essentially it wasn't really made open to everybody in the school system at large. There's no indication yet from the Ministry of Education on whether students who didn't get to write the test this year will have to write the test before graduation. Whether the test will be administered next year for everybody, we don't know. For those of you who are in grade 11 going into grade 12, there has been no indication yet if they will waive the requirement. The requirement was waived for grade 12s this year, but I don't know if that's going to happen again next year. When it comes to community involvement, I would say anticipate that you still need to complete those 40 hours of community service before you can graduate. The Ministry of Education made a pretty big concession in terms of what fulfills the requirement for community involvement this year. I sent out a message just over a week ago detailing some of those changes to that requirement. And so there's a lot of things that you can do to earn those 40 hours now that you couldn't do in the past. If you have questions about that, that's something that maybe you can save for your course selection meeting. We can go over it at that time. Now that's just for graduation. In addition to that, you may need some specific things for applications, especially for looking at universities, specifically 6 academic courses. We'll touch on this a bit later because there's some more documentation on this later. We'll come back to that right now, later, sorry, I should say. Now, in terms of how your 30 credits break out, you have compulsory courses and then you have electives. 15 compulsory courses are subject specific. These are the subjects here. I'm going to invite you to come back to this slide and actually look over this in more detail because we don't have all the time right now. There's also a document later in this slide deck and also on the bigger slide deck that has been shared that you can use to track your compulsory courses, your subject courses. Every year when you sit down to do course selection with the TPS guidance office, we ensure that you're hitting these requirements. So this is kind of taken care of for you. Trust that if you've been with us since the start, since grade 9, most of this is taken care of. If you're new, we're going to track what you have coming in and we're going to make sure that we can fulfill these along the way. And so we are very, very hands-on in support of this. And so don't stress it too much, but do, when you're looking at your course selection and picking courses that you might be interested in, be cognizant of this so you can make appropriate choices if you're missing 1 or 2 of these requirements. Again, with the community involvement, there's a lot that has been changed. And so essentially a lot of work that you could have done at home previously, which wouldn't have quite counted, like housework, chores, helping, tutoring your younger sibling, those things normally wouldn't count as community service hours. They actually do now. And so again, I sent out a message. If you didn't get that broadcast, send me an email personally. My email was included in the messaging for this webinar, and just let me know so I can share that message with you so you can see the list of things that are available for you to take. All right, and so when we're talking about making decisions for grade 11 and 12, we're looking at actually planning for what usually means post-secondary education, especially for students at TPS. And for the vast majority of students at TPS, that's usually university planning. But college programming as well needs some planning and preparation to make sure that we have what we need to pursue the options that we might be interested in. When we're planning, graduation is a big consideration, but because TPS guidance helps and supports you so much, it's probably best for you to focus most of your energy on subject-specific interests and potentially career interests if that's where you are. A lot of you are going to have questions about what should I do, what should I study, what program is best for me based on a career-focused mentality. We're going to get to that a little bit later. It may not be necessary for you to think that specifically at this point. While we're making these decisions, it's important we're aware of a few specific things, especially as a TPS student who might be applying to university. Universities in particular accept only 2 types of course codes. Those are courses that end in a U or an M. And I have in the next slide the course code kind of cheat sheet broken down so you can actually understand what course codes mean. U is university prep and M is mixed college or university prep. There may be a little bit of confusion with the verbiage there too. In the US system, college and university are almost synonymous, but in the Canadian system, college is usually community college, university is the higher education. Now, in terms of college programming, so community college, they'll accept most any level. This says that most colleges will accept the O course. This actually kind of doesn't really apply so much. They'll use that as a graduation requirement. Most colleges will look at U's, M's, and C's, and C is college-specific prep. We don't offer C courses at the grade 12 level at TPS. We do offer two C-level courses at the grade 11 level. One of them is the entrepreneurship course, and the other one is the college for math, or math for college, I should say. All right, and so this is the course code broken down. You don't really need to remember this, but just to give you kind of a real basic rough outline, the things that I want students to be aware of are this number and this letter at the end. Everything before that is just related to the subject. And so the number at the end, 4 and 3 are the numbers that we need to be aware of. For those of us going into grade 11, anything that has a 3 means it's a grade 11 level. And for those of us going into grade 12, anything that has a 4 means it's a grade 12 level. This is specifically important for students who may be interested in taking summer courses or courses outside of TPS, just to make sure that you're taking the right courses that align with your plan that you're following through with at TPS, and then the courses you're taking on your TPS schedule. Again, U is university prep. So this course, MDM4U, if we know the subject, would be like M is math, and so it's a math course at the grade 12 university level. We could parse that very quickly if we know what these codes mean. Again, not something you have to memorize, so to speak, but just be aware of the 4 and the last letter, whether it's a U or an M or C or O if you need those. So for our grade 10 students going into grade 11, there is an importance in making sure that you're aware of prerequisite requirements, specifically courses you need to take at the grade 11 level to be able to take a course at the grade 12 level. Mostly this is for math and science students. And so if you want to take specific sciences in grade 12, you have to make sure you take those sciences in grade 11 or else you won't be able to. And if you want to take specific math courses or specific math streaming, you have to make sure that you take the appropriate math that opens up those options for you. This is not work that you have to do on your own to figure out. All you have to be aware of is what are you interested in? And then the guidance office will support you in picking those prerequisite courses that you need. But you have to be able to express that interest so that we can make sure that those prerequisites are fulfilled before you go forward. You can also put together a plan of taking a prerequisite in the summer if it's something that you think is just an elective for you, but you want to have that option in your grade 12 year. We'll talk a little bit about summer courses and how universities might view those later. And so when it comes to framing your mentality, I like to tell students to think of the concept of planning backwards. This means envisioning where you might be in post-secondary studies and then plan backwards from there to make sure that you have in grade 12 everything you need to get to that step, and then grade 11 everything you need to put yourself in a position to get to that step in grade 12. Now, this can be challenging, especially for those of us who are in grade 10 going into grade 11, but even for those of us going into our grade 12 year. What happens if I don't know what I want to do? What happens if I don't know what career path I want to follow in? What happens if I'm super talented at a bunch of different things? I can do everything, but I don't know which one is my favorite. You don't have to make those decisions in a defined or finite sense at this stage, but you can plan in a way that keeps as many doors open for you as possible, as long as you know what you need to be to have in your pocket, I should say, at that final step to get to the university or the college programming of your dreams. And so when you have that kind of longer term thinking in mind, you can then plan backwards from there to either keep your options open, or if you are aware and you know specifically what you want to do and you're driven, then you can actually say, okay, what do I need to reach my goal? What do I need to take each step of the way, and plan that way. So planning backwards is the best way to go. And so you may want to, as a grade 10 student, take a little peek at the grade 12 courses that are available and offered and be like, ooh, that sounds interesting to me. Maybe I should make sure that I have the prerequisites or even just the subject knowledge in my pockets before I go and take that class in the grade 12 year. But then it's always best for all of us to be a little bit aware and cognizant from this stage on about what post-secondary programming is out there and what it looks like. And there's a vast, vast array out there. And so I know that can be intimidating. Let's just talk about it and start to keep it in our mind, and trust me, it takes care of itself along the way. And so in that pursuit, the guidance office is very hands-on at TPS. Many of you may have like questions about, well, what support is available for me? What does it look like for me going forward? For those of you in grade 10 going to grade 11, your next course selection meeting will be the first meaningful meeting that you have, potentially, unless you've reached out to meet with us individually, that talks about post-secondary planning. You're going to be supported and given information on exactly what you'll need for anything that fits your interests, and maybe given some resources to help you start to do some more individual research and explore your potential options going forward. Okay. If you're in grade 11 going into grade 12, you can expect the beginning of a very hands-on process. In your grade 12 year, you're actually going to be supported through each step of your application. And that looks like at the end of the day, your guidance counselor sitting down with you and helping you fill in the application details. So grade 12 students do one application each when they're applying. I do hundreds a year. And so I'm helping every student apply and actually typing in the information just to make sure that everything goes where it needs to. The documentation that we need to submit is submitted, that timelines are aware of on all sides. All of that stuff is supported. And if you're like still questioning and making decisions, we're supporting you there too. You're provided with research documents. We're doing problem solving together. We're getting to know each other on a personal level so that we can make you, as comfortable and as confident as you can be going forward when you leave this institution. Some things that you can start to consider as you're looking forward to your potential, post-secondary career, really based on who you are, your interests and your strengths, you can have any number of options, or maybe, there's not a lot of defined things there for you yet. You're still figuring things out. Here are some things that can help you start to like narrow down. What are you interested in personally? Academic strengths is always something that is helpful to pay attention to. What successes you've had in the past. Now, this one's very important for me. Volunteer work, or it could be actually not even volunteer work. You could have a part-time job that helps you identify who you are in a workplace setting, work experience as well. But this kind of involvement actually is the most, I would say, the most conducive to understanding who you might want to be in your career going forward. It may be that you have a specific subject interest, but that subject interest can lead to a lot of different things. Students interested in science could practice in science in many different ways. So that can manifest in many different ways in your career. And maybe at one point in your life, you might want to practice in one way, and another, you might want to change. And so it's important that you know who you are in a team, in a professional setting, or in a workplace setting, or in a community setting. And those are skills you can speak to and focus in on when you're thinking of post-secondary planning. Your personal skills, any talents or hobbies you have, your values are very important too. And so when we're sitting down to do course selection, when we're doing applications, and when we're doing planning, when we're exploring, we use as much as possible value-based approaches. And so what's valuable to you will lead to like long-term fulfillment and contentment. And that doesn't always look the same for everybody. And so a potentially successful career path may not be satisfying to somebody who doesn't have values that align with that career. We're trying to do that work as well. And I know it sounds like a lot to figure out at this stage of your life, but you don't have to know in a finite sense, because again, we can always make changes, we can always adjust, and we can always keep doors open as we go forward. Now, it might help a little bit to start to also think a little bit about where you might feel most comfortable in terms of post-secondary. There are program options that you could look into in terms of subject-specific experience. So do I think I'm a math and science person? Do I think I'm more of a humanities and social sciences? Do I like hands-on stuff more? That kind of stuff could actually overlap, and there could be, multiple interests there. But just start to book it. Start to chart it for yourself and say, you know what, I find that I'm more inclined to pick this subject area, or I'm more inclined to pursue those types of opportunities or these types of opportunities, and just chart that for yourself, because it will be helpful when we're actually sitting down to do meetings. Also, we're going to look a little bit at different education models. And so university is a great place to be, but it's not the best place to be for everyone. And also university and college programming is starting to really radically change. Hands-on models, experiential learning, internships, co-ops, work placements are becoming much more prevalent. Colleges offer degree programs now. There are bridge programs. the educational landscape is crazy. And it's super interesting and super fascinating right now. And so you may actually want to look at like non-traditional means of pursuing your academic and career growth. And then finally, of course, being aware of the job market, what trends are happening right now, what skill sets and talents are in demand, what things do you think that you can have to offer for the world of the future? Obviously, we can't predict what will happen in the future. If you asked me 3 years ago, what would the grad class of 2021 look like and what would their prospects look like, I wouldn't be able to predict the world that we're in today. But nonetheless, you can do a little bit of speculative work and it will help you as you're going through this process. And now, the two main streams I alluded to earlier of post-secondary education are university and community college. You guys, I'll leave you to read this in more detail and at your own leisure, because again, we're time sensitive here, but to give you a very general outline, university courses tend to be more aligned with critical thinking, research and inquiry, and more academically based work. And that can be reading, writing, testing, studying, lab work, this kind of stuff. Whereas college tends to be more focused on task-based learning. And so learning how to actually apply a skill and doing more hands-on and experiential learning. It tends to happen more often in a college program. It used to be that college programs used to have a pretty drastic advantage when it came to co-ops and work placements, but I have to say that a lot of universities are starting to really add that into a lot of their programming these days. And so I would say in both institutions, you'll find a lot of experiential learning opportunities when it comes to like co-op and work placements. Now, if you go to college, does that mean that you cannot go to university in the future? Absolutely not. Like I said, there are bridge programs, and these programs mean you can start out in college. Usually a college diploma is 2 years, and then you can actually, after those 2 years, transition to a university program. Sometimes it's a 3-year entry level before you go into university and finish off 1 year or an additional 2 years. Similarly, students go to university quite often, get a degree, and then come back and do a 1-year college graduate program because it gets them a co-op placement in an industry that they're really interested in, or adds a skill set to some of the more theoretical work that they did in their university undergraduate degree. This model, in terms of what your educational career looks like, can be any number of manifestations depending on who you are. There's so many ways that you can go about this. And so don't think as one over the other as a better means to success. Think of where do you need to be right now to best leverage your skills, to best help yourself improve, to build confidence and build talents that you can use going forward. And then you can always add on afterwards. I think it's important that the students of today embrace the attitude of being lifelong learners. I know some of you may not love the idea of going back to school or hearing that you might go back to school in your adult life, but you may do so. So there's two frameworks of thinking that we have in the room today. They're grade 11s and grade 12s. If you're grade 11, going into grade 11, I should say, those of you in grade 10, you're going into grade 11. If you're going into grade 11, you should be doing these things as you prepare for course selection, which is coming up probably in a few weeks for you. Probably take me a few weeks to get through the grade 12s. So you want to assess a few things, your marks in the classes, of course, your work habits, your attendance, and overall learning in grades 9 and 10. Those are things you're going to carry forward into grade 11. Grade 11 is a year where you have more electives than you ever had before. Your only core subjects that you need to take in grade 11 are English and math. Everything else is optional based on who you are as a student. And so a lot of students ask, do I have to take a science in grade 11? Well, the answer is no, not necessarily, but if you want to, you can. And so that will be hashed out when we sit down in the actual course selection meeting. We can answer those questions for you individually, because depending on who you are, the questions could be answered very differently. We have a rules of thumb document that you can use. It's in the slide deck that was shared, the larger slide deck here, and it's also on here. And you can also get it for your course selection meeting. That will help you identify courses you need to take to potentially apply to certain programs in university. You can use that to do some of our planning backwards. And so grade 11 for me is also the best year to explore electives, to explore subjects you've never tried before. Now, do grade 11 marks impact university admissions? Somewhat. They're not the most important marks for university admissions. And so it is the time to explore. It is the chance to explore. Some students may be interested in doing what we call early admissions. early admissions doesn't exist in Canada in the same way it does in the United States, where they have actual, real, regimented early admissions cycles. In Canada, early admissions means if you get your applications in early and your grades are really good, a school might give you an early acceptance, but it's not really a timeline or a process that's set up in the same way it is in the US. And so for those of us thinking of studying in Canada, I would say sometimes it's better to de-emphasize trying to get stellar grade 11 marks to do early admissions. It's better to maybe use grade 11 to explore subject areas and explore interests so that when you go into your grade 12 year, you feel more equipped to make informed decisions. Universities will use primarily your grade 12 marks to make decisions, and most college programs as well will use almost exclusively your grade 12 marks to make decisions. For those of us going into grade 12, so grade 11 is going into grade 12, this is the time to do some more serious planning. You're going to look at potential program interests, research universities out there, research programs out there. If you don't have a clear and defined goal just yet, don't worry, it's okay. We can keep doors open on some of the same planning we did in grade 11. And so going into grade 11, you thought about continuing in the academic math stream or not, or continuing in the sciences or not. These are the same types of decisions you can make going into grade 12. If you feel like, those are interests that work out for you, that feel like grounding of strength and confidence, and that you might want to study in university, you can continue to do so, whether you've decided to actually apply to a science program or not. If you feel like actually your strengths lie elsewhere and you want to focus in on those so you can feel like more confident going into university program that helps you build those strengths and you can revisit other interests later, then you can do that as well. These are decisions you are going to have to make in a real sense, that it becomes much more challenging to do it all in your grade 12 year, because most grade 12 students don't take a full course load the way they do in grades 9, 10, and 11. The reason being is that when we're hitting our 30 credits, we usually are at 24 credits at the end of our grade 11 year. That means we only need 6 more to take in grade 12. And most TPS students will take 3 courses each semester, 1 spare each semester in their grade 12 year. That spare period allows you to spend a little extra time working on essays, preparing for tests, and refining assignments. And it's really important because those little marginal gains can increase your marks substantially and mean better chances of getting admitted to the university of your choice. And so students who take a fuller course load generally have less time to do that work. Not to say that that's discouraged. If you want to do that, you can as well. And so know that going into your grade 12 year, you're usually looking at paring down and refining your options to a more concise set of courses. The only course that's consistent for almost every grade 12 student is English 12. We do advise that students take English 12 at your home school. I'll talk about that a little bit more when I talk about admissions. But most students will be taking that at TPS. And then beyond then, everything is an elective. And so the math isn't required to graduate from high school in grade 12. Okay, so let's talk about general admission requirements for university. Now, what you see on the page here are the very basics. This basically means that if you have this, you can apply. If you don't have this, then it's not advised you apply because most universities will not accept you with this bare minimum. That does not mean if you have this that you are in, okay? And so there's a difference between admissions requirements and estimated cutoffs and actual competitive averages over the years. And I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. And so most universities will say, along with your Ontario Secondary School diploma, obviously you have to graduate. You should have English at least a 70%, and then any other prerequisite at a 70%, and generally around a 70% overall average across your top 6 classes in grade 12. Now, let me talk a little bit about top 6, a little bit of a misnomer. So universities will look at 6 marks at the grade 12 level to make a decision. Those 6 marks will comprise of your admissions average. Let's take a random program to use as an example. Let's say you were applying to U of T, their Department of Arts and Sciences, and you wanted to study history. They'd say, okay, we want you to have English 12. That's a requirement. And then we're going to take your 5 next best courses at the U or M level to make an average. Okay, that would be your top 6, so to speak. Now, if English was actually not one of your top 6 grade 12 marks, you had another grade 12, you took a 7th course, and it was actually higher than your English mark, they're not going to actually bump out English and include that higher mark. English will be in your average because it's the program requirement. If you were actually going to study in the sciences, in the arts and science at U of T, they would actually take your English, mathematics, usually calculus, and probably 2 science courses. And so probably, let's say, biology and chemistry. Those 4 will be in your top 6, and then they're going to take your next 2 highest courses at the U or M level, and that would be your 6-mark average. They'll compare your average against other applicants who applied in your application year. And so let's say most years is about 85% to get into U of T for either the social sciences and humanities or their sciences stream. You would say, okay, my average is an 85. I have my top 6. I think I'm in. Not so fast. It depends on the year. In your application year, it could be a particularly strong applicant pool, and maybe that's not enough in your year to get in. It could be actually above the pool for your year. It really depends. And we never know that because we don't get all the access to who else applied in your application year. So when we're making decisions about applying to university and looking at requirements, we're actually using a lot of experience. We're looking at the numbers that we have from previous years. We're strategically planning for what we think students are capable of during the school year. We're supporting our grade 12s as much as possible to help them achieve their goals. But we're also putting together applications where students have ideal programs, some safety programs, and maybe some just break in case of emergency options there as well. We're always picking good schools and schools that are a good fit for individuals and schools that students would be excited to go to. But we want to plan in a comprehensive way so that we make sure our students get into programs that they love being in. Okay. Now, in terms of the top 6, when you're in grade 11, we're going to actually ask you to take a grade 12 course. So those of you who are in grade 11 right now, you all know this. But those of you who are in grade 10 going into grade 11, it might be a little bit intimidating to hear, wait, I'm going to take a grade 12 next year? Yeah, you are, ideally. Some of you may choose not to. It's totally optional, but we are going to recommend it. We actually put it in the second half of your school year. And so in the second semester, when you've built up some academic skills and some confidence in your grade 11 year, and we usually are recommending an M-level course because the workload is a little bit less. They're curated in a way so that our grade 11 students can be successful in them. And if you're diligent and hardworking, just as we know most of you are, then you'll be successful in that course. Now that provides you with a backup. So planning forward again to your grade 12 year, let's say that you're taking only 6 courses in your grade 12 year. Well, what happens if one of those go wrong? Like maybe you and the teacher don't match. Maybe something happened at home. Maybe you had an illness and you missed a few tests and your mark is much lower than you'd like it to be. That grade 12 course you took in your grade 11 year could slot into that spot and be a boost to your top 6 average, so to speak. It's the course level that universities use, not the year you took it in. So if you took a grade 12 course in grade 10 and you did really well, they could actually use that for your admissions in grade 12. It's just the course level that they use. Again, this is all stuff you don't have to memorize, but if you have questions about this, we can put them in the chat at the end of this, or we can talk about them in your individual course selection meetings. Now, this is our rules of thumb sheet. This helps you kind of identify the courses you have to take to get into some programs. Like we said, there are 6 course requirements for most programs, but the actual subject requirements are different for some courses. So let's go through these. This is very general. This isn't all-encompassing. So for different schools, this will actually be different. This is just so that you can kind of plan as a catch-all. If you're following this, probably about 99% of the programs you'll be good for. So we usually go to the highest level in terms of this cheat sheet. And then, some programs actually don't require you to do everything on this. And so Bachelor of Arts, for example, which is usually humanities or social sciences. Humanities could be something like language classes, so English literature, philosophy. It could be other languages, foreign languages, classical studies usually fall in there as well. They will actually ask you to have English 12 and then your next 5 best courses, whatever they are, as long as they're U or M. If you're interested in commerce or business management, most programs will ask you to have English 12, advanced functions, and calculus and vectors at the grade 12 level. And then they'll add 3 more courses to make your top 6. Okay. And again, those courses should be at the U or M level. Right. For those of us in engineering, most of our courses in grade 12 are decided for us. It's going to be English, advanced functions, calculus. You're going to also take physics and chemistry. That's 5 of your 6 determined for you. And so you have one more elective. And of course, if you took another in grade 11, that could be another elective that they could use. They'll just take the best mark of the whatever remains and slot that in with the other 5 and make your admissions average. And so these kind of by default have to be in your top 6 if you're an engineering student or potential engineering student going forward. And so this cheat sheet is very helpful for students to help you plan backwards. If you look at this, this can help you pick what you want to take going into grade 11 or as you're a grade 12 student going into grade 12. There are sometimes some additional requirements for universities and university programs. Now I'm going to talk about the ratio of courses that you should be taking U to M and also grades plus applications. So the ratio is basically universities at the most competitive level ask that students take at least 4 U courses to 2 M courses in their top 6. Not all schools ask this, okay? I have to emphasize that. Not all schools ask this. But as a TPS student, we're going to try and advise that you follow that ratio to give yourself all the options under the sun. Schools that typically ask for this would be the profile of U of T, UBC, McGill, Waterloo for some of their programs. These kinds of schools will ask that you keep that 4 to 2 ratio. So 4 university prep courses at the grade 12 level versus 2 Ms. Okay. And so something to be cognizant of for those of us planning for summer school or out of school programming as well. There are also what we call grades plus programs. And so these are programs that look at your grades, but they also ask you to have more in addition to that. That could include a supplementary application where you write essays based on prompts that they give you. They may ask you for a resume. They actually may ask you to do an interview. If you're going into the creative arts, they're going to ask you for a portfolio for sure of your creative work. If you're going into the performing arts, you're going to have to do auditions and add a letter of intent. You may have to provide references. All of these things will be detailed in the admissions requirements for any program that you're researching before you apply. So you'll know this going into your application process. Students who are applying to programs that require these things usually spend more time on their applications. And so it's something to factor into your application year. Because if you have a heavy course load and you're trying to do as best as you can in the classroom, you want to maybe limit or manage or navigate the burden you add in addition to that when it comes to supplementary applications. And so students, particularly applying to engineering programs, applying to visual arts, performing arts, and students applying to some commerce programs need to be aware of this, that those programs tend to have plus elements to them. Again, this is something that you'll discuss with your guidance counselor when you're doing your applications in grade 12. You will be informed of this. It will not be a surprise to you. How do applications happen? And so applications are done primarily through the Ontario University Application Centre, the OUAC. Now, some of you may say, well, actually, I want to study abroad. Well, that's okay. That's fine. But we use the OUAC application as a centralized planning to help you branch out, because planning for that is almost the same as planning for international. Now, there are additional requirements for some international programs and for individual students and individual situations, which we could discuss in our application meetings. But the OUAC and the Ontario application is a good starting point for almost any students. Okay, the OUAC opens their application usually in October. Most years you are given a student PIN, and then you can go in and do your application. At most schools, you're given that PIN, and then you're on your own. At TPS, we actually hold the PIN, and then we sit down with you and go through the process together. So first we go through a planning process, a research process, and a decision-making process where we come up with our list of applications. Then we sit down together and we actually do the application on the OUAC as a team. And so you won't have to do that or navigate this website by yourself. For those of us applying to schools in the US, and some of us may be going abroad as well, we can talk about that in individual meetings. Maybe I'll touch on that a little bit after the US schools. There are other things that you may do. And so there's a website called the College Board. That's where you can go to do a big search. They have a great search engine actually for schools in the US, because there are so many schools in the US of different models, beautiful campuses, and a different kind of school atmosphere and life in the US. So you can kind of find that information online on the College Board. You can also register for the SAT test on the College Board. The SAT test is an entrance exam. It has been, for the most part, waived as a mandatory requirement for almost every university in the US, along with the ACT, which is an alternate test you can write to the SAT. students have the option at every school in the US to choose between the two. It's been waived because of COVID. Now, students can still write that test. They can still sit down and write that test where it's available and if they can register for it and submit those scores to universities in the US if they want. Some schools will give an advantage to students who write the test. Some schools will not. It's test optional right now because not everybody has access to that due to COVID. So that's something to be aware of going forward for those of us applying for next year. In addition to the College Board site, there's a website called the Common Application. Most universities in the US are available through the Common Application, and that's what we use to actually apply with most students at TPS. And so Common Application is a great place to go as well. They also have their own search, and you can put together your applications for almost every school in one website. Be aware if you're applying to the US that these applications tend to be much longer than Canadian applications. They almost, regardless of any program that you're applying to, almost always include essays, multiple essays in many cases, and a lot of information disclosure. And so these applications tend to be more time consuming. And so normally what you try to do is cluster to a small amount of schools there, and then maybe some schools that are quicker to apply to at home if you would like to have options for both. Or if you're all in on studying in the US, do some research early so that you can actually define your schools, start your applications really early in the process, and spend more time writing those essays for all the applications that you would have to submit. In terms of timelines for both, usually what you're looking at for Canadian schools and Canadian applications is around January to apply for a deadline. Most schools. There are some later deadlines usually, and very few that are earlier than that. And so January, mid-January is usually the application deadline for students in Canada, whether that's Ontario or other provinces. And then in the US, the deadlines can be all over the place. If you want to do early decision or early action, it could be as early as October, September, late September. If you want to do regular timeline, it's usually around January as well, but very school specific in the US. They have also a lot more schools with rolling admissions, which means you can apply at any point. And so that's stuff that we'd research together as you're going through your application process. So if you're asking yourself, okay, well, this sounds great, this is amazing, what makes me stand out compared to other applicants? It's really ensuring that you have a comprehensive application profile. Not every university will ask for more than your grades, but many will these days. And where you have the opportunity to do so, you put yourself at an advantage when you have stuff to share. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be excelling at everything you do. It just means that you have to show commitment, involvement, engagement, and the willingness to try. So volunteer work, community involvement, very important. Leadership activities doesn't mean you have to be always in a leadership role. That could be just putting yourself outside of your comfort zone and showing the willingness to try new things, which is an example to those around you. Not every school will ask again. And so most schools won't see your volunteer or community service hours, for example. They won't see that total when you're applying. But where they do ask for it, that's where it benefits you more. Sports involvement, extracurriculars, clubs at school, good to be involved in those as well. Not only do they show up as good community engagement and involvement, so that universities know that they're getting a student who will be involved in the community, but it also creates potential references through teachers and fellow classmates. And then, of course, if you can, any awards, certificates, or accomplishments that you have can actually factor into your applications as well. Again, a lot of schools and a lot of programs are really only looking at marks for the application process. If you are looking to get into a competitive program or a competitive university, then you should focus on some of these things that will make you stand out compared to other applicants. For the most part, universities will not give you more merit for things that look and sound very impressive. They'll give you more merit for meaningful engagement and meaningful self-reflection as well. They'll ask you to write to and understand what you get out of the involvement that you engage in, and that shows somebody who's mature and grounded. And so this page is available again on the slide deck, and something I definitely recommend you guys come back to, some places to do some research. And so for university interested students, the Ontario University's info page is great. Now, you may say again, I don't think I want to study. I want to get far from home. Look, start with studying about Ontario programs and universities, because that will help you figure out what's out there. And then you can start to branch out and look for specific options. It's a great website. It's a great tool. Every program at every university in Ontario is on this website, and it tells you all of the requirements, the class intake sizes, a lot of great and important information, what supplementary applications you may have to do, all of it's there. And then links to the university websites. And so that's ontariouniversitiesinfo.ca. Go there for sure. For those of us interested in college, ontariocolleges.ca is the same thing. Now, also for those of us who maybe don't know what we want to do or don't know what careers are out there, ontariocolleges.ca is actually the better website to go to. Super organized, and the way that they orchestrate their programs are basically by sectors of professional setting in society. And so it's kind of actually a neat place to go to see what jobs are out there. And then you can find the correlating program at the university level as well. And so I actually kind of like ontariocolleges.ca. It's a good place to go to just be like, I'm lost, I don't know where to begin, what's out there. And they actually have little profiles of jobs, what workplaces look like, what work settings are like, depending on what career sector you're in. It's a great website for just like, some basic level research for those of us who are maybe looking for some direction. If you're looking for community service options, Spark Ontario.ca is a great place. Volunteer Toronto is a great place to go. Again, I shared a message with some resources for searches there a couple weeks ago. The OUAC, if you want to get familiarized with the application, but you don't have to worry about that too much because we'll be helping you with that. And if the Ontario University Fair is back on, we'll see. They may actually do a virtual one for 2021. It's a great place to go and to start to engage in a discussion with universities as well. Okay, so running out of time here, so I'm going to kind of breeze through these next few pages. And so what's next for all of us sitting in the room today? First of all, let's focus on our course selections. Let's not get too lost in the planning and the imagining about post-secondary. But let's, of course, use that as a basic framework for what we want to keep open as options and then plan backwards. And so you don't need to know what program you love or want to go into yet. Just know which programs you might be interested in. And then you can look down and see, okay, well, what do I need to keep those doors open for myself? Okay, so do that. Plan what courses you think you want to take. You all got the course selection sheets, excuse me. You can actually just highlight what you think you might be interested in, and that's going to be the beginning of our conversation when we come into the guidance meeting. I do want to show you the sheet very briefly. And so this is the sheet, the document that you guys got, just so that I ensure everybody's able to read this. These columns are the thing to be most cognizant of, okay? So period 1, period 2, period 3, period 4 goes down the column. And then everything that's in the column is available in that period, okay? And so that can help you plan for when you want to take classes. And these four, this cluster, of course, is semester 1, and this cluster is semester 2. We're hoping to be semestered again next year, and that's what we're planning for, okay? And then when you're on the sheet, you can actually see the course codes now. So now you will have a bit of an idea of what this means. You'll understand why all of the grade 11 courses have a 3. You'll understand the difference between the U's, the M's, and for example, over here, the C's. You'll understand what that means now and how to plan going forward. And then in the grade 12 level, you'll understand what the U's and M's are, and maybe look at that 4:2 ratio as well for those of us who think we're going to be for sure applying to very competitive programs. O courses still count towards graduation progress, so you can still take them. They count towards building knowledge bases and skill sets, so you can still take them. At the grade 12 level, you most likely won't be taking the O course unless you need it as a credit for graduation. So that's what each of us should be focusing on right now. Let's look at the course selection sheet and start to highlight the things that might be interesting to us. We can start conversations with our parents, with our families, with our friends, colleagues, if we have them, to start to identify what's out there that we might be interested in. There are a few documents that you guys can use to help you plan. And so for those of us who want to make sure that we have what we need moving forward, especially those of us in grade 10 going into grade 11, but also those of us getting ready for grad next year, you can use this tracking sheet just to check off the things you know you took already. And that can help you determine how close you are to graduation or if you're missing anything. Some of us may be in unique situations where we started halfway through the year or missed a bit of school. This can help us figure out what do we have, what do we need, and where can we get those things, or how can we fill in a timeline. And then this can help you, this planning guide can help you actually plan backwards from grade 12. So you can actually fill out all the grade 12 courses you think you need based on the programs that you're interested in, then fill in the grade 11 prerequisites you need for those as well, and then look backwards to see what else you need to fill in. And so I can help you actually figure out what your course selection planning looks like for the next 2 years. And so again, at this point, it's not vital that any of us know exactly what we want to do. We can keep our options open, and make decisions at the end of the day. Okay. And when I say at the end of the day, that means that even in the application process, you can apply to a number of programs from different subject areas, and then still decide once we get acceptances what we want to do at the last moment. And so usually students don't have to apply to post-secondary programs until May at the earliest. That's usually for out of province or out of country international. But it's June 1st or usually the first 2 or 3 days of June for those applying within Ontario. And so you have quite a bit of time before you're making a decision at the end of the day in your grade 12 year. And so you don't have to make those finite and defined choices just yet. Parents, you have a big role in this too, of course. You can start discussing future goals, discuss and share your experience. It may be different than the world that your child is going into today, but that doesn't mean it isn't relevant and isn't important as part of their decision-making process. Where possible or where needed, you can support with ensuring that ministry requirements are being met. You can help them with the education plan in terms of planning backwards and looking at options. Some of that research can sometimes be a little bit nebulous, and when you have a physics or math test coming up, maybe work you don't want to do, lean on mom and dad a little bit to help with that work. Ensure that the course selection sheet is completed and ready for the application meeting. I believe that an email is being sent to both the student and the parent for everybody when the application meeting is booked, and so that sorry, I should say the course selection meeting is booked. Sorry, don't mean to confuse you guys. And so make sure that that sheet is filled before you go into the course selection meeting. You may not actually get all of the courses that you filled out or that you highlighted, so pick more than you need. So if you have to take 8, pick 10 just in case, so that we can make sure that you're getting at least if not your top choice, your top 2. All right, so I'm gonna forgo the recap because I actually kind of want to get more time for questions and answers actually. And so again, this is all available on the deck. So I figure you guys can go through this again if you want to in detail and read to kind of get that information. So we're going to open up the chat now so you guys can start typing in your questions. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start by answering some of the questions that were sent to me before the webinar. And so some of you emailed in questions, and I have a few put aside. Again, I'm not going to be able to get to everybody's questions, unfortunately, but I'll get to as many as I can. And if you have questions that were not answered, and usually it's because they're super individual, then you can bring them to your course selection meeting. So the first question I have is, and this is a typical question that I get quite often, actually. I have no clue what I want to do. I don't know yet what I want to do in the future. I dropped science. I don't know, should I take biology next year? I'm wondering, should I keep taking sciences in grade 12? I'm in a bit of a mess. Okay, so when we look at the actual rules of thumb sheet, we identified that actually most science students have to take 2 maths and 2 sciences to apply to most science programs in not just Ontario, in the country and internationally. And so if that's the case, you're not looking at taking 1 science to keep a door open. It's not really opening that many doors. Actually, there are very few science programs that will take 1 science and maybe 1 math as part of an actual application. They'll need usually the 2 sciences and the 2 maths, especially for those streams and those programs. They're super competitive. And so it depends on who you are as a student, depends on where your confidence level is, depends on what you want. Note that if it's something that you're not sure that you want to pursue, but you maybe have noticed stress or struggle with in the past, it's something that you can put together a longer term academic plan for. And so what I mean by that is maybe you focus in on applying to non-science streams entering your undergrad. And then once you're in your undergrad, you could explore options to then open up the science electives to yourself within your undergrad programming, or even plan for an undergrad to build an initial skill set in something that you feel confident in and that you're strong in and successful in, and think after your undergrad in terms of revisiting maths and sciences to supplement that education. Again, it's helpful for us to think of ourselves as long-term life learners. And so, additional schooling is always an option. We can always come back and do things that we couldn't do today. And quite often we'll find that, with that extra time, with building the skill sets that we already have established, those other subjects become easier and more accessible to us at the end of the day. And so just from a pragmatic standpoint, taking 1 science doesn't open too many doors and can actually hinder you in your application year more than it helps you. Okay, the next question I got is, where can I find out more about courses at TPS? And so essentially, TPS website. go to the TPS website and under the academic section, you'll see listings of all our courses 9 to 12, and they'll have a little brief paragraph write up for each course there. Some of the new courses, like I mentioned, are not there just yet, but hopefully they'll be up soon. And if not, you can always ask questions and we can share what information we have available. The next question is, when do university applications have to be submitted? As mentioned, usually it's around January for most schools, most programs. But I will say that most TPS grad students, are going to finish their applications well before that. We actually try to make sure that your applications are done at least a month before your deadline, so you have extra time for the supplemental applications you may have to do, or you can make adjustments and changes as grades come in as we lead up to the deadline. A lot of universities are flexible and allow you to make changes after the deadline has passed, but you need to have that application in beforehand. And so we're usually applying early in that sense. And so early application is kind of standard at TPS. All right, hi, Mr. Fleming. My question is, how many programs can you apply to at one university, and how many universities can I apply to? I added that last part. So it's a really good question, actually. Standard is, in Ontario, most universities will only allow you to apply to 3 programs. Actually, the OUEC application usually caps you at 3 programs per university. Some universities, it's a little bit different, and you actually can apply to less than that. So let's go back to the U of T example, for example. They'll only allow you to apply to 1 program within the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And so if you wanted to apply to 2 programs, let's say history as one, and then maybe sociology as another, they're in the same faculty, same department, you couldn't apply to both. You only apply to one. And that's kind of because your first year is a general year anyway. And then in your second year, you're actually kind of reapplying to the program of your choice. And so they kind of limit you in that way. And so that would be 1 application instead of 2 potentially at U of T. And that means that generally a lot of the interests that you might have within the school fall within 1 application choice. But as a general rule, 3 per university. And then in terms of how many universities you can apply to, well, usually it's as many as you want. We generally advise you keep it around 7, 8 or so. That's an appropriate number of schools to apply to. But I've had students apply to much, much more than that. If you're looking out of province, most schools will only let you apply to 2 programs at their school because you're applying directly through their website in most cases. And so it's your top choice and then your backup choice. That's usually what you get. And then if you're applying internationally, again, depends on the school. And so that can kind of vary a little bit because the rules get pretty lucid when we get outside of, outside of the boundaries of Canada. Okay, another question I got was, can I take courses for early acceptance? And then there was also a question about the timing for next year. So TPS is planning to go semestered next year. Of course, that is all contingent upon what's dictated by the Department of Health. And so we're going to follow the standards that are advised and the restrictions put in place to ensure the safety and well-being of our students first and foremost. But all things being equal, if we're able to, will be a semestered system again next year. And then in terms of taking courses for early acceptance, again, early acceptance in Canada as such is not really a process in the same way that it is in the US. And so generally what you're looking at is, if you're looking at early acceptance, if you're a student who knows you want to try for early acceptance, your grade 11 year becomes much more important, because those are the marks that will be used primarily to make a decision for early acceptance. If you do early acceptance, you can always apply again in the regular acceptance cycle if you missed that early acceptance timeline. And then I had another question: what are good services to use for SAT prep? And so that's a good question. We don't necessarily promote one organization over another, but I will say that a lot of experience and a lot of students have gone to a place called Prep Skills, and they have a lot of information about SAT and ACT prep. There's another organization called Angus Lloyd that does test prep. Forest Hill Tutoring does test prep. I would stick to those for now, but again, if you have more questions individually about that, you can always reach out to us and we can send you a more comprehensive list. But a good place to start, Prep Skills, because they do a lot of seminars, they host webinars, they bring in specialists and people from NCAA and from just lots of different colleges and schools in the US in particular to help you identify what you need to apply to those schools and how to prepare for your SAT test. There's a lot of resources available on the College Board website I mentioned earlier too, including practice tests. And so that's another great place to go to do SAT prep. If you want to write the SAT or ACT, we do recommend you do some preparation before you sit to write those tests. They are very difficult, just in terms of like physical experience, let alone the subject matter. And that you're usually going to take at least more than one, I should say, chance at the test or shot at the test. Okay, let me go to the chat a little bit here. Okay. Okay, so I have a question about timing here. So if you want to get into physics program, and physics is only offered once in the second term, won't that make it harder to be accepted? So not necessarily. And so university timelines in terms of decision making goes right up until May. And so what will normally happen is universities who are still waiting for a mark, let's say that you're applying to physics and they see that, okay, for physics, we want you to have English, want you to have advanced functions and calculus, and we want you to have obviously physics 12, but you're usually applying to a science program, a general science program to major in physics. So you may have to have another science there. So if you have your English, your advanced functions, one of your sciences, let's say you did biology, and then some strong grade 11 marks posted at the time of your January deadline for applications to that program, they may give you an acceptance based on the strength of your marks. If they're waiting for marks, what they'll normally use is your midterm of your second semester. And so they'll look, and those are usually around April. And so they'll look at your physics midterm and then your probably calculus midterm to make a final decision at that time. There are plenty of spaces available still at that time. Some students will have gotten in much earlier who are in a full year program because they have marks available earlier for all of their courses, but that doesn't hinder you in any way for scholarships, for acceptances, or anything like that. University timelines are built to be advantageous to both students in a full year and a semestered system. Okay, so I know I want to go into education, but I'm not sure what I want to teach, science, math, or drama. Is there something where I could do an education degree with those courses? Yeah, so concurrent education courses are available at a number of schools in Ontario. If you're planning on practicing or teaching in Ontario, it's advised you go to a school in Ontario so that you can get registered more quickly with the Ontario College of Teachers. And so those concurrent programs will give you a degree in education as well as a degree in another subject area of your choice. And in that subject area degree, you can also take electives from different subjects. And so you can do something like graduate with a major, let's say in biology, you can minor in drama, and then you can also get your Bachelor of Education at the same time. So concurrent education be something for you to look into. Okay, so our university is taking into account COVID in terms of student ability to work and engage in community activities. And so again, the majority of university programs are not going to look at your community service involvement. Most programs don't actually ask for that. So, I know that sometimes there's this misconception that I should have a lot of community service hours because it's gonna help me for university by default. Not by default. Only if you're applying to certain program streams and certain competitive school or programs. And then if you are applying to those, I think the expectation is that you're still looking for opportunities to try and engage in some way. It may not be the way you could have before COVID or without the influence of COVID, but you are still trying to engage because there are plenty of opportunities out there. Volunteer Toronto has a number of listings for, and so does Spark Ontario, for a number of listings for COVID-based help and support. But it doesn't have to be through an official program. It could be helping seniors in your neighborhood. It could be helping out at home with your family or online. Social awareness, helping with the mental health of students and those who are isolated during COVID. There's so many things that you can do. The thing is that if you want to be competitive for a competitive program that does care about that you do look for opportunities. It's important that you look for the opportunity even in difficulty. Now, will they expect you to have 1,000 hours of service, given the past year, or not have struggled in the past year to find opportunities or to adjust and pivot through COVID? No. you always have the opportunity to write to who you are and your experience. And so if you didn't get to build up those community service hours, maybe you did personal development that could be just as important as that, and you can write to that in your application. There's no fixed template for what the model for success looks like going forward, but that a student who's engaged in some way, who's introspective, and who's a hard worker and sincere is usually given the benefit of the doubt as much as possible. Okay, so here's interesting. I heard that Waterloo adjusts marks depending on the school you attend. Do you know what adjustment they may make for Toronto Prep School? So unfortunately, there's not that much transparency in the admissions office at any university, so they would never tell us that. But there was an article that was published a few years ago where Waterloo was subpoenaed basically to share some information that showed that they did have a blacklist of schools. TPS was not on the blacklist. The students have had great success applying to Waterloo programs. We've had a student this year get into the chemical engineering program, one of their most competitive programs to get into. And so generally, when it comes to profiling in terms of where you take your courses, the one thing to be aware of is taking core courses outside of your home school. That can include English, mathematics, and if you're interested in the sciences, some of your science core courses. That universities will be able to see whether that was taken at your home school or outside of your home school. Not all universities care. I would say the vast majority don't, but some universities will count that against students in some way. What that looks like, what that means, not a lot of clarity. It could be just a preference. And so two students who have the same average, but one took all the courses at their home school, might get a preference over a student who didn't. Okay, as long as my tech support doesn't mind, I think I'll go for a few more minutes and maybe we end at 8:15. So I'll get a few more questions in if you guys are happy to stick around. Okay, so here's a good question because we're transitioning from a COVID year into back to normal schooling. Will tests be open book next year for grade 12? I would say don't anticipate that, but I don't have a defined or clear answer on that yet. I don't think that policy has been set yet by TPS because again, so much is contingent upon what we're told to do by greater authority. And so not set in stone yet, but I would say it's always best not to prepare for that, just that you are prepared for the more difficult of the two options. So as a contingency, prepare for regular testing, return back to regular testing, but I can't say for sure. So again, I want to touch a little bit on this taking credits outside of school. It's getting more and more common, and so I think it is an important topic to touch on. So can you discuss how universities use summer courses provided by organizations other than the home school? Most summer courses are given equal standing to your homeschool courses. And so the only exception and the only time you want to be cautious there is when you're taking a core subject outside of your homeschool or in the summer. And so again, English and math tend to be the most relevant there. But I have seen many students put in successful applications having taken those courses outside of their homeschool or over the summer. And so it's not across the board rule. It's just like if you're being really cautious and you want to be like really super conservative, then that you plan to take those at your home school 9 times out of 10. And then you can take whatever else you want as an elective. That's a U or M course in the summer, and it will be given equal standing. So that can go into your top 6, so to speak. So is there a downside to taking science in the summer, and will schools see that as a bad thing? And so I spoke a little bit to the bad thing, but I do want to speak a little bit to the downside. The one downside about summer programming for university applicants is the length of time before you see that subject matter again. And it could also be the breadth and the depth of knowledge that you build in that subject if you take it in a shorter period of time, as opposed to extending it over some more months where material can actually really sink in and become part of long-term memory. And so that would be the biggest risk, aside from how schools might view it. I would say, again, most schools don't really are counted against students if you take that course over the summer. But if you are taking a science course that you may be studying as your major in university over the summer, and then you don't see it over a year before you sit in your first lecture, it could be a bit of a challenging situation when you're in first year and they expect you to just hit the ground running. Here's a great question. What are your thoughts about taking a gap year? And does the TPS guidance office offer suggestions for what else a student could do to help develop their sense of direction and study interest during a gap year? I think that a gap year is a great idea, especially for students who may need more time to make decisions that they feel confident in. Post-secondary studies and the pursuit of your long-term career, it's not a race. And that there are many pathways that happen throughout university. Students start university on time, but don't finish on time all the time. Students start full-time, go part-time. Students start part-time, go full-time. Students get an extra degree. Students go to college. A lot of different things happen. So gap year can be a very valuable year to kind of help you build some more knowledge about who you are and what you might be interested in. TPS guidance office has supported many students in doing gap year planning, and that can look a number of ways. Some students apply to university right out of grade 12 and ask for a deferral. And so that means that they don't have to go to university right away. If the university approves the deferral request, they'll say, we'll hold your offer for a year. You take the year to do the self-development or whatever you've detailed to us in your application. And then in the next year, you'll be automatically offered a spot in the same program. And you have to accept that spot. The condition of that is that you don't go to school anywhere else, obviously. And then you can spend that year doing community service work, volunteering internationally. You could get a job. You can do some academic upgrading at the high school level. You can take courses at the high school level, just not at the post-secondary level. You can do any number of things that help you feel more confident, prepared, and informed going into the year. Or you can forego applications in your grade 12 year and wait a year before applying. And that could include all the things that I just mentioned, and then you're including applications into the university cycle or college cycle in that gap year. And so it can be a really good idea. A lot of schools and a lot of some of the top schools internationally do recommend it. There's a culture of it more so in Europe than there is here in North America, where it's almost like, a foregone conclusion that students will take a gap year before they go to schools like Oxford. And so gap years, I think, are a great idea for students, especially students who maybe are not sure and feel like they need the time. It could be very valuable. I don't have a lot of clarity. I see a lot of questions about the model of delivery next year. I don't have a lot of clarity on that yet, and that's because we can't say for sure, because we could plan for in-person, full in-person semester instruction next year, and then the week before get information and notice from the Ministry of Education and health authorities that we shouldn't be doing that because there's been a spike or there's been another wave. So we can't say that in any definite sense right now, but I can say that right now, anyway, the plan is to be in semestered study. And then whether we'll continue to offer a hybrid model, I don't think TPS has defined a policy on that yet. I don't think that decision has been made yet. You can expect that those decisions will be made closer towards the end of the school year. So by June, I think TPS will probably have an idea about potentially offering a hybrid model. Okay, I'll do one last question before we go. Okay, and so yeah, this is a good one. Do you offer guidance to apply to scholarships also? And so scholarship searches, for the most part, are student dependent. So students have to do that research work for the most part. There are a few scholarships we support. And so those are nomination scholarships. So some scholarships you can only apply to if you're nominated by your school. We support students with all of those. Generally, what it looks like is there's an internal application process for grade 12s. And so we say, here are the scholarship deadlines for internal applications at TPS. You apply and other people in your grade apply, and then the TPS has a panel who actually decide who's going to be our nominee. Once you get the nomination from your school, you can then go about the application online to the scholarship organization. So we support students with those. We define those. You'll get a document at the start of the year that defines those. You'll know what they are. But when you're looking at scholarships to individual universities, students have to do that research on their own. I'll say the vast majority of scholarships entering university are automatic consideration. And so those are grades-based automatic entry scholarships. There are some individual application scholarships, and the Ontario University's info website is a great place to go because they actually have a pretty good and comprehensive scholarship search. And if you go to the full curriculum document that we sent, there's also a link to the Canada-wide scholarship search that you can use to search for different timelines. There are so many scholarships out there, so it's kind of challenging with the current capacity anyway to do individual scholarship search for every student. And so if you're interested in applying to scholarships and you feel like you fit the profile of a student who can get a scholarship, then I would say you start doing that research in the summer, because it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work. There's a lot out there. And so you want to be aware of that. And the timelines for those can be pretty early too. So you want to be very aware of the timelines. And that's a general rule of what you might need to apply to those scholarships. 85% average and above is typical. A lot of community involvement, great references, potentially like work experience, that those types of things will probably start to put you in and about the competitive range for some scholarships. And then, we can go like up into the high 90s, research experience, those types of things for others. And so really depends, but you can start doing a search in the summer if you're interested in that. And then note that some of the bigger, more common scholarships you will be supported with, but it is work that primarily students do on their own. All right, so thank you all for attending. I think we're gonna have to leave it there. If you have more questions, more individual and personal questions that weren't answered here, feel free to write them down and bringing them into your course selection meeting. I look forward to meeting and talking with all of you. We're going to be meeting one-on-one, or again, I say one-on-one, but really it's student and parents. You guys are all welcome. The meetings are during the school day, just to facilitate actually getting through them in a timely manner. And so for parents, if you're not able to attend those meetings, you can like send your kid in with the question. That's perfectly fine. Or you can email me after the meeting happens later in the day, and I'll try and get back to you with the answers as soon as I can. And then if anything else comes up, everybody, feel free to reach out. You know how to contact me. Thank you for attending. This is a very exciting process. I want to end with that. I know that sometimes there's a lot of anxiety, questions, and nerves around this. It's a really exciting process to go through. It happens much easier and much quicker than you imagine. And usually at the end of the day, there's a lot of smiles and celebration involved. And so it's why I do what I do. And so I have to say that you guys all have a lot to look forward to. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. Good night.